Did that make you thirsty? Something tells me you need to watch this video. I promise that was my one and only fun joke for the video. I promise. So as one does, I was perusing Amazon's newly released books the other day and I came across Beer Bread. Promptly proceeded to check out. How can you not impulse buy with a title like that? I've never even thought about baking or even cooking with beer. Normally it's like wine that comes to mind. I guess it makes sense. Beer is yeasty, bread is yeasty, you know? Now, if you're just here for the beer cinnamon rolls, go ahead and I'll put a timestamp below that you can skip to, which it's fine, I don't blame you. Otherwise, let's get into the book review now. So today I'm going to give my first impressions of this brand spanking new book, which I got the ebook version, so I do not have the physical copy here with me, and we will walk through the recipe afterwards. But first, if you have not done your act of kindness today, I will help you out and you can go ahead and feel free to subscribe to me to fulfill your one act of kindness for the day. You're welcome. So this book actually just came out February 4th, 2020 by the author Lori Rice, who actually has another cookbook called Cooking with Craft Beer or something like that. I'll insert a picture around here so you know what I'm saying. We can agree, Lori must be quite the catch. Like, who wouldn't want to hang out with this lady? As of right now, you can purchase the Kindle book for $9.99, or you can purchase the physical copy for $16.99, and this book contains 75 recipes, all of which contain beer. I wrote some examples down just to give you an idea. Some that stood out to me were blueberry beer bagels, brown ale apple bread, quarter cinnamon caramel spread, caramel if you prefer that pronunciation, and basic pizza dough. So these all sound so freaking yummy, and so she goes through different chapters, anything from quick breads and breakfast treats to yeast breads to pizza and different pizza flavors. So she has a huge range in here. The way this book goes is Lori starts out by describing different beers and what beers work well in recipes. So I like that she kind of gives a little education on this and what she's found from experimenting and all her research. She said, I wrote it down because I don't have this memorized, but she says blonde ale, brown ales, amber ales, porters, and stouts tend to have IBU or international bitterness unit of 40 or lower. So basically this means that types of beers tend to be as hoppy. Hoppy beers do have an IBU higher than 40, and hops and cooked at high temperatures can give off a bitter taste, so they don't taste very good. And she also recommends avoiding imperial stouts and imperial IPAs because those have a higher alcohol percentage, which also can just overpower the flavors of whatever you're making. So stick to things that are 7% and lower. Sorry to disappoint any of you if you thought you're gonna be getting a little boozy off this, but that's not what this is about, okay? And then she goes on to group different beers by different tasting notes, which kind of makes it easy and understandable of why different types of beers are used in certain recipes and what kind of flavors they go well with, etc. So this book has amazing photography, which, let's be real, that's very important when you are buying or considering buying a recipe book of any kind, because that's what's going to tempt you, that's what's going to make you want to make recipes. You can see what it looks like, you have some type of gauge. So for me, that's super important, and every recipe includes a photo in this cookbook. So that's a big thumbs up right there. So a lot of these recipes are actually very unique or require ingredients you might not have in your house besides the different types of beers, and you know, there's different types of flours you might need, because of course it's called a beer bread book. So those are things you probably knew you already might have to purchase, but you know, there's some things in here I never even heard of, like marzen, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, like dried blueberries, random spices, things like that. So it's definitely more of a specialty book. I'm sure you already knew that, but since it's specialty, not only in the nature of the book of beer and bread, but the ingredients required in some of the recipes you probably don't have in your pantry. So you probably will have to spend some money going out and getting different ingredients and preparing for the recipes. Something I really like about this book is that each recipe has not only the type of beer that you should be using, like a brown ale, a pilsner, it says the type, but it also gives you suggestions at the end of the recipe, which is really awesome. I just think that this recipe book, you know, just at a first glance would be a great gift for someone, and it could also be a great book to buy if you're always bringing different treats to different events like work or other social events, because it's such a unique kind of conversation starter. You know, anything with booze in it tends to spark people's interest, so I think that that's just a really cool aspect. So those are my first impressions of the book. I think it's a really great item for the price, but we haven't tried the recipe, so who knows if they're actually good. I mean, it's promising because it's laid out really well, there's really great information, and the photos are good. Let's try the first recipe. I could not resist the beer cinnamon rolls because they just look so freaking good and cute, and they're little mini ones, so how could you pass up on it, right? So let's get into how I made them and the results. For this recipe, I just went with what I had in my fridge, which worked out well because my boyfriend had some Budweiser, which is a lager. That's what is recommended to use in the cinnamon rolls. And Lori recommends allowing the beer to be room temperature, so I took them out of the fridge and I poured them into a glass and waited about an hour or two. It was time for the dough, which is simply flour, active yeast, and the dough actually required less than a can for the actual beer, so I guess you can go ahead and sip on some like lukewarm beer while you're, making the cinnamon roll, so that's kind of a plus, right? The first steps for making the dough was to mix the flour and active yeast together and then pour in the beer afterwards, which of course this would go a lot better if you had a stand mixer, which I don't, unfortunately, so I had to do all this by hand. And then I mixed it until I had this kind of shaggy dough, which you can see here. And then it was time for the sugar, the butter, and the egg. Then I mixed it around pretty good so everything was incorporated like she said, and then you can go ahead and add in some vanilla and salt. And then you're supposed to mix this with your mixer, which I ended up doing by hand, which again really hurt my arms. So you can definitely smell the beer in the dough when you're making it. It actually weirdly smelled good and tasted good too. You could taste it in there, which I've never experienced making dough and beer, so it was kind of weird, but the sugar, the slight sweetness of the dough with the beer actually went pretty well together. So far, so good. Then the next thing you need to do is have patience, my friends, and place this thing in the fridge for 20 to 24 hours, and then take it out the next day and get to work. Voila, here we are 22-ish hours later. Lori is sure to let you know that this dough is very sticky, so use a lot of flour and to make sure you roll it out while it's still cold. The recipe is only making about 6 little cinnamon rolls, so I kept that in mind when rolling it out. And once I was happy with my shape, I went ahead and smeared the melted butter all over it, which these clips just give me every time. I love seeing like melted butter like smeared onto stuff. And then I went ahead and sprinkled the filling, which was simply brown sugar, cinnamon, and optional nuts, which I threw in some chopped walnuts. I didn't show this clip because it was very simple just to stir these 3 things together. So now we can go ahead and put our cinnamon rolls together, roll it all up into a delicious little bun. The process started out really good and really simple, but then after a roll or two, it ended up getting very sticky like she said. I don't have a scraper, but she recommended putting flour and then trying to roll, which actually worked pretty well. I was surprised. I never heard of this tip before. So I just dumped a bunch of flour and used a spatula kind of like underneath to scoop it up. And eventually I was able to roll the whole thing up. So long story short, if I were to try this again, I would put a ton of flour down before. I put more flour than I had showed in the clip to see if that would help at all. Then I sliced it up into 6 beautiful little rolls and placed them in a muffin tin, a greased muffin tin, which she used little cute mason jars, which would make for a really fun gift, but I didn't have mason jars and I was gonna go buy them just for this recipe. So I figured muffin tins were the next best thing. And then I went ahead and popped them in the oven at 350 degrees for 30 to 35 minutes. While we're waiting, we can go ahead and make the icing. I'll admit I was a little skeptical of this icing recipe because it uses sour cream, which I personally had never heard of in an icing recipe. Basically, it starts out with the powdered sugar and mushing around the softened butter with the powdered sugar. Then you go ahead and add in the sour cream and vanilla and stir it until smooth. And here's what I ended up with. And let me tell you, this icing was freaking delicious. It has a slight tanginess with the sweetness of the powdered sugar, which balance out the powdered sugar really well. So, I'm not a huge fan of cream cheese frosting, so this was kind of like a nice in-between. And honestly, I think I might try this frosting on a lot more cinnamon roll recipes that I do. Anyway, the cinnamon rolls ended up cooking perfectly. There was no issues with that, so I was really happy. And I immediately scooped the icing on top, which, oh my gosh, look at this. This looks so good looking at melt and ooze into the cinnamon roll. And then the most important thing, it was time for the taste test. It was time to see what these things look like inside and all of that good stuff. Biting into these, I was really pleasantly surprised because they had the perfect amount of dough to filling ratio along with icing, and it was just like a very wonderful experience. They're very tender on the inside, but on the outside they're nice and done. I'm not entirely sure if you're supposed to really taste the beer flavor in these. I guess I have to do a little more research on that, or if it just helps with the flavors of the cinnamon roll and everything in there. So overall, I give this first recipe a 10 out of 10. I thought it was very well written out what you're supposed to do. I had no problems besides maybe a little sticky dough, which she warned about and gave tips for. So I was really happy. Lori Rice did a really great job on this. Excited to try out more recipes. So that was it for today. Be sure to, like I said, subscribe if you'd like. I really want to test out more recipe books and different recipes from those books and just give my review on them and feedback. So if you want more of that, like the video, let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an awesome day.